Okay, good morning, everyone. Let's get started. I'm Rich Berliner from 5th Gen Media and the Connected Virtual Tech Event, Day 2. I am really excited to introduce our next panel, Supply Chain and Systems Integration, Best Practices for the COVID-19 Era. Before we get started with the panel, I'd just like to do a couple of items of housekeeping. I'd like to encourage everyone who's listening in to visit our exhibitors. And to go to the show floor. We had a tremendous day yesterday in terms of booth visits. We'd like encourage everybody also to visit the chat rooms and talk with the booth sponsors and everyone on the floor, and also join the chat rooms just to interact with other people, network, and do your thing. There are also prizes to be won. There are a ton of Amazon gift cards. There's a Nokia system that they are giving away, and there's also a number of Apple items. So if you go in and you follow the directions, there are contest rules for doing that, but please go in and follow those rules. And this is a great opportunity to turn this over. The panel moderator today will be Peter Bordenero. And Peter, I'd like to turn it over to you now. Have a great panel, and I will be back with about 10 minutes left to ask some questions. But thank you all for being with us, and make it exciting.
Great. Well, thank you, Rich, and appreciate the invitation to this event. Good morning, and welcome to the Connected Virtual Tech Event. As Rich spoke, in this panel, we're going to focus on how the supply chain and systems integration as a whole has really been impacted in COVID-19, or during this COVID-19 period. You know, we'll also roundtable how the industry, more importantly, is adapting and how we're evolving with best practices that can assist all of us really implement projects with less cost, less risk, and do so faster. So to do this, we've assembled a panel of experts, and I'd like to introduce the panel very quickly here, and we'll start our panel discussion right after that. So first of all, we have Lori Caruso. She is CEO of Safai Technologies. Lori, say hi to everyone.
Hello, everybody. Good morning.
There we go, nice and lively. And then we have Shane Rubin from CTS. He's going to help us understand kind of how this is impacting the integration world. Shane, say hi.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Let's see. We also have Amy Huizinga from Annixter. She's got a wealth of experience kind of helping customers navigate through the supply chain, especially during these times. Good morning, Amy.
Good morning, everyone.
And then, of course, we have, like we spoke about earlier, our person from the West Coast, Brett Chester from Site Tracker. He's going to help us understand some of the solutions that are out there from a technology standpoint. Good morning, Brett.
Good morning. Thank you, Peter. Thanks for having me.
You got it. So, so my name is Peter Bordenero, like Rich mentioned. I'm from Annixter, and I'll be moderating this event. So most of us have been, part of a virtual event recently. Seems to be the new vogue thing to do based on the pivot everyone's making. And we want to make sure this is informative, engaging. So please, if you have questions, at the bottom of the screen, there is a little chat button there. We actually want questions to come in, and Rich will be moderating that for us towards the end. So we welcome your questions and your participation. So let's get kicked off here now with our lively conversation. So the past several months has certainly been a challenge for all of us on various fronts. And that is an understatement, probably of the morning, from a variety of perspectives. In regards to technology and systems integration, many projects have been delayed, on-site protocols have changed, and essentially we're all having to try to adapt to this new reality that's out there. So, we've kind of coined this as, how is everyone adapting to this new norm? And we're all doing it in different ways. So to get the conversation started, Shane, how has COVID-19 impacted the wireless and DAS industry as a whole? What have you seen?
Well, generally speaking, things have slowed down. They slowed down initially, but we're seeing that they're starting to pick back up. Our spending priorities have shifted, but the need for the service isn't going away. Now, as it relates to CTS, initially in the first 4 to 6 weeks, we saw things really start to slow down. People were scared to visit sites. Our customers were scared. Our own folks were scared. And especially around places like hospitals and airports that are typical targets for in-building solutions. those were considered high-risk areas, and so people didn't want to really be there. Those site walks, those fewer site walks meant fewer quotes, fewer scopes, things like that. And the sales activity was virtually non-existent in the early stages, and now it's virtually existent, I guess is the way we say it. Everything is virtual. And a significant portion of what we do has a physical element in the integration space anyway. So those physical pieces, the on-site touch points, the construction, those were the things that were slowed down. The front-end piece, the stuff you could do virtually, that really hasn't slowed down at all. I mean, I think the desire for these things way outweighs the negative impact that we're all going through right now. So when we think about an already highly complex, pressure-packed business, this only exacerbates that problem. I mean, we're already always just kind of on the razor's edge of this technology and deploying this technology. Now we throw this wrench in here. It makes things a little bit more challenging, but I think people are rising to the occasion. Now, it's not all bad news, though. We're seeing that some people are realizing this is the best time to build. We have access to venues that aren't as well populated. There aren't events happening in public spaces, and now we can get in and not really disrupt those events. Or in Class A office space, if there are fewer people there, we can get in without as much of an interruption. So, and the other thing that we're seeing is that now, after coming at the back end of this thing, we're having a hard time finding people. We're actually trying to hire a lot of field-related folks, and that's actually becoming tougher, but that's a good sign. I think the folks who can get through this through a lot of creativity and efficiency, through new programs and processes, are ultimately going to be stronger when this is all through.
So great insights there. You spoke about some of the challenges. I just want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into that. You talk about skilled labor, and getting that skilled labor, certainly a challenge nowadays. I mean, I guess based on what was and what is now, other than getting on site, what are some of those challenges that really, as an immigration firm, you have to deal with? I mean, could it be mobilization? What are those challenges that are so different in the COVID-19 era than they were, just a couple months ago?
The challenge is that there's a lot. But the first one is safety. Right off the bat, we don't work in a business or an industry that thinks about life or death scenarios every day. And we're in clean, predictable spaces for the most part. We don't do heavy construction, but we have to now. That's an important aspect of what we do. Usually, we take safety precautions that improve the probability that someone isn't going to get hurt. But now we have to make an exchange. Now, in exchange for the virus protection, I need to introduce a danger of heat exhaustion. Got guys in Tampa, Florida, working outside in 95 degree and 95% humidity, wearing a mask and a face shield over that. And some people are, on the threshold of heat exhaustion. It's a tough situation that we're working in that we've never had to be in before. There's a lot of defining of new safety processes and how do you define a primary versus secondary exposure, things like that. There's a lot of construction delays. The construction delays are caused by having to clean your carts every day when you're building something, having to clean the area 2 to 3 times a day when you didn't have to do that until the end of the day. You have access restrictions. You can't be in elevators or stairwells at the same time. Right? You have to keep your team sizes very small, because if there's an outbreak, you would then have to quarantine that entire team that might have primary exposures within one another. Then you can have things completely out of control. Other trades on the job site have a case, and then the venue shuts down for a few days for cleaning. There's the social impact. There's the morale dips. There's fear, uncertainty. They're uncomfortable in their working conditions, so you have to deal with that. So we try to counter that with, for a few months now, we've been paying our employees extra for every on-site hour they're working. So for those who have to go out in that field and be uncomfortable, we give them something a little extra to keep them feeling better about the situation. It's not a safety thing, but it's an appreciation thing.
Right.
And we don't force people to go to sites if they are actually scared, and we don't hold that against them. Everyone has a different tolerance of the threshold of fear they have to deal with. like I said earlier, the limited qualified workforce. For a time where unemployment is high, we're struggling to find qualified folks in the field to deploy what people still want to deploy regardless of the situation. The way we quote and scope jobs has changed. You have to take into account these inefficiencies on the job site. What could happen if this, things that we haven't had to deal with before. And then we have a design center. We've got a design center that is, its strength is proximity. So we've got 30 people in a war room that design with each other that now have to be dispersed to their homes, and coordinating that has been tough. And then finally, purchasing is something I know we're going to touch on today. The lead times are significantly different. There are places that some manufacturers completely out of stock with things. We have to find alternatives. The OEMs themselves don't have as many workers in their warehouses. The shipping companies, they're struggling to get us deliveries on time. We actually use distribution partners as leverage because they have stronger relationships with the OEMs, and they're able to put a little muscle behind that and maybe get us something we couldn't have got on our own, so that helps. And then our purchasing department also has to now buy equipment that they've never had to purchase before. The face masks, the shields, the thermometers, all these different things. So that's really what we're seeing. There's a lot of a broad spectrum of issues.
Shane, is that it? That's all the challenges? That's it?
Yeah, that's it. For sure.
Well, that's obviously quite a few. There's a lot going on there, and obviously the world has changed for so many different industries. And skilled labor was tough then; it's tougher now. I had heard from one general contractor that they were saying that expect a 30% increase in non-productive labor, just to get on site and mobilize, get suited up, cleaned up, all those type of things, which is something we've never had to contend with to that extreme, right? So it's a reality out there, right?
That's not a surprising number.
Yeah.
Based on what I've seen.
So Amy, let's segue off that conversation. So as a result of this COVID, you're talking about projects and how they've been impacted. So from your perspective and seeing it across a variety of trades and service organizations, how are you seeing those organizations navigate through that?
Yeah, so Shane brought to light everything that we're seeing across multiple customers, right? Regardless of what their industry is or what vertical market that they're supporting. The new safety protocols on site, making sure that people are there to get material deliveries. The old model or the traditional model of delivering a project has to be completely redesigned effectively and needs more scalability and flexibility. So back to your point about adapt earlier in the conversation, right? Customers are trying to figure this out, and there's been without a doubt disruption to not just their projects, but the way they operate their business. And they're trying to determine, how do we protect our employees? Like, Shane had mentioned, with potentially delivering PPE with every delivery, which we're doing for some customers today. And the skilled labor shortage is another area, right? That they're looking at new innovative ways to be able to deliver projects that are outside of the norm. So maybe doing some pre-assembly or DOA checking devices in advance of shipping, whatever we can do in advance of getting it to the site so that we can support the new requirements for social distancing. So we're seeing a lot of customers coming to us to create new ways of actually performing installation and how they receive in materials and how that impacts whether it's a two-man job or a one-man job. So I would say that, pre-COVID, we were doing a lot of these things as a support to business efficiencies and financial models. Now it's becoming a necessity for some of the things that Shane shared with us, labor availability and safety, new safety protocols, and helping with that kind of contingency planning if the project does get shut down.
And Amy, of course, based on all these challenges that we're facing, of course, all those deadlines are being pushed, right? The time schedules
Absolutely.
are, they give you a lot more time to finish a project than they used to, right? Sarcastic.
Not so much, not so much. I mean, there's lots of shifting happening too. We're seeing, I mean, Shane alluded to it. Some projects are being put on hold, budgets are getting reallocated. So, it is absolutely a challenge for those downstream in the supply chain, if you will,
Right.
to help kind of support the accelerated schedule.
Accelerated. Shane, you and I chatted earlier about this, but I mean, the timeline doesn't often change, does it? With all these challenges and all these obstacles, it's not like they give you weeks to finish the project, right?
That would be nice. That would be an added bonus. The only place I've actually seen that, and I don't know that it's for certain, but in the sports and entertainment, where you thought a season might be starting, there might be a little bit of a delay if a season doesn't actually start. But other than that, I haven't seen. The spreadsheets are immune to this disease, and the dates that are on those spreadsheets have not changed.
Yeah. And speaking of sports, by the way, we're all trying to adapt not having sports in our lives. For those of us who enjoy some of the sports out there, that's a big adaptation for us also. So, hey, Brett, question for you. So, we talk about the supply chain, and, visibility is essential really for a project and for a supply chain. What's going on? Where is the material? So what are some of the challenges you see today, and how is your organization kind of poised to assist?
Yeah, thank you. I think, at SiteTracker, obviously, our software is designed to enable the deployment and maintenance of telecom. CTS is one of our customers, so it's a pleasure to be with Shane here on this. I think what we're seeing is that forward-looking companies have already adopted technologies to help them overcome challenges like project deployment. So now Shane, I don't know if you heard this, but Shane wasn't concerned about how he's getting people into the field or things like that. He's more concerned about on-site, right? So if you think about it, the challenges that most other companies are overcoming are still the ones that they were facing 5 years ago, a year ago, 6 weeks ago. They're not actually getting themselves prepared to be able to say, hey, let's remove one piece of the puzzle from the equation. So I think that what's going to happen and what we're seeing is that innovative companies that are in this game for the long haul are saying, how do I remove some of those pieces of the puzzle? And SiteTracker's a solution to removing things from the board. So, we think about skills equalizers. SiteTracker we think of as a skills equalizer. It gives everyone a simple task checklist to complete things. So if you think about skill shortages, how do you remove that from the equation? Well, you try to insert a solution that comes to help that. If you think about project complications and delays, how do you remove that? Well, you know who your best vendors are by being able to assess them in a solution like ours. You know who, from a permitting perspective, is allowing you to actually go ahead from a municipality perspective. You start to think about how can I leverage technology like our Einstein Analytics, which is a predictive modeler that says, hey, if you do this faster, you'll get that result. So I think that there's all sorts of different technologies that people can be thinking about that will remove these complications. And then, of course, you've got the things that you can't not focus on. Hey, somebody's hot in Tampa, they're at exhaustion. Okay, well, let's build that into the checklist that they need a 15-minute break here. So you start to simplify your life by leveraging technology. And we're seeing innovative companies, as I said, like CTS, jumping up and saying, we need this. And CTS was well ahead of the curve, but we've still got a whole raft of people that are saying today, every day, putting their hand up saying, I need to fix this underlying problem, which will allow everything else to be my focus rather than needing to worry about, hey, I need to maintain this envelope here that's defining who needs to go where at what time. So that's the type of things that we're seeing.
Good insights there. And I think one of the core denominators in all that is people are stepping back and rethinking how things
100%.
get done. And clearly technology is a part of that, and will be
Yeah.
a more accelerated part of that. And I think if you look at health and safety nowadays and people, how they're trying to, technology absolutely is going to be a key part of that. I mean, the thought of having a registered nurse taking your temperature every day, Brett, isn't probably a scalable long-term solution for a lot of organizations, and probably not part of that cost model. So I think there are a lot of ways that technology can be a part of that.
Yeah, definitely.
We talk about another challenge. This kind of, we're focusing on all the challenges, and we're going to segue into obviously some of the solutions like Brett alluded to. So Lori, another challenge that is top of mind to many customers is capital. And if you think about it, we've heard and seen different types of funding models that exist in the market. So what does it look like today, and are some of these funding models having success? How does that whole capital kind of challenge kind of manifest?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, with these deployments, it comes down to affordability. If you can't afford this, you're going to have problems, correct? And when you hear, Amy and Shane talking about, all of the additions to scope, it's increasing your amount that you have to spend. And, back 5 years ago, it was a nice to have these systems. Even 3 years ago, it was a nice to have. We know we want it. The people are telling us they want to use their cell phones in my building, but I don't really need it. But now we're in a completely different state of mind. Now if you don't have your cell phone working, we've got issues, we have risk. We can't, identify if there's problems in the building. So
Laura, yesterday, just to interject, I had 0 bars on my phone, and I actually went into a tizzy. I had no idea what was happening. It was in my own house. I said, "What's happening?" I felt like a 12-year-old brat. What's going on? My wife's like, "Calm down." I'm like, I don't know what's happening here. I don't have signal. I felt like I'm tethered from the world. So to your point, it's crucial.
It's like cell shock, right? Cell shock. I'm going into cell shock right now because I can't use my phone. But also, I mean, when we look at these different financial models out there, whether it's the 3PO model, which is a very, very, enticed model where it's an ownership program so that venues will be able to just let it go. Okay, build it, you own it, you take care of it, deal with the carriers, I get a free system, it's fantastic, and I get a monthly income. Those are few and far between. I mean, there are only so many large venues and buildings, Class A buildings, that will exist to do that. So now we're looking at even Class B buildings and smaller, infrastructure still needs to have these systems built. And they don't have, first of all, the capital for the most part for the improvement because it's not within their budget. And they don't have the ability to say to the carriers or to anyone else, hey, come on in and build it for free for me. I want the system. So they're stuck with that challenge and they know that they need to proceed with it. So now we're starting to see other opportunities come up from a financing model where they can lease and have it, instead of going into a CapEx, it's now becoming an OpEx. So it's a little bit more palatable for these budgets and affordable for these budgets to go through that. And, there are several different features. Other companies have, different differentiators, so to speak. But, we see, a lease program of 3 to 5 years. The building owner will just put that through and it becomes now, like I said, an OpEx model. They can build it, it's affordable, and then they can make sure that today their tenants, their space is covered with technology. So it's really important to look into that if you can't afford it, so to speak.
Yeah. That OpEx model is certainly taking on a lot more relativity to a lot of budgets and a lot of decision makers. And I think there are a lot of innovative companies trying to bundle together day 1, day 2 services as part of that, maintenance, and kind of saying, here's a whole package. So in that same vein, other than a reduction in margin stacking, are there different financing models that could be different other than purely that?
Yeah, and that's really important too, because, a lot of these companies will outsource and, they just don't have the capabilities, which is fine. They have to obviously, look at what their portfolio is, so to speak. So they're outsourcing. And with that outsourced material, you're starting to see margins actually increase. And when you start to add those margins up and say the carriers come in and they're asked to contribute, carriers know what those bills cost. This is what they do. So when they look at what that dollar amount is to join these systems, they're completely saying, no, we're changing our mindset here. This is not going to continue to happen. So now those companies are faced to say, how do we get creative? How do we build a system, have the carriers join, and let's look at a different model and a different subset. So now integrators are starting to take a step into the financial model. So the integrators aren't outsourcing, they're taking it all turnkey in-house. So now it's alleviating that margin stack, so to speak, and now it's a whole different change of sorts when it's presented to the carriers. And the carriers are looking at it, you know, they have lots of networks to deploy, you know, 5G outside macro networks, they have a lot going on. So it's important to understand their technology roadmap, what they're doing from a regional perspective, how they're pursuing their customers, and what their budgets look like. It's important to get ahead of that so you understand what their mentality is, and then you can, you know, bring that to the building owner, the property owner, to say, this is what it looks like. Let's put a strategy together for you. Let's just not say, let's build it day one. Let's see what we can do to make this affordable for you and see who can contribute and how best to do that.
And Laura, you mentioned the magic word there that, you know, I was waiting for it to come up, 5G. You know, it always comes up. It is on the horizon. It's going to require a lot more connectivity, a lot more hotspots. You know, just it's going to require so much more. But it's also going to enable all those technologies to be so much more timely and efficient, if you will, with less latency. So on the horizon, I mean, there's another level of financing because how's all that going to happen? And, you know, TBD, I guess, right?
Yeah, and I mean, you look at all the technologies out there that exist. I mean, the typical traditional model is let's get your DAS system funded. That's the traditional model. But now that, you know, you have all these other technologies making a forefront, you have public safety infrastructure, you have all of these smart building infrastructures that come in, security, things like that. There are financial models out there that actually will afford that entire suite, so to speak, of technology versus just, I'm going to build your DAS and I'm going to cover your DAS for you. So it's important to note that because this is definitely changing. With my public safety piece, with these mandates that are enforced, you're looking at these buildings in order to receive occupancy permitting, they have no choice but to install these systems. And chances are they might not even realize that they had to up until final hour. So when they're being told you have to do this or you're not going to receive occupancy, what do you do at that point? But public safety isn't something that anybody's going to want to finance, right? But it's changing. And now we're starting to see.
It's a need to have, right? It's a requirement, right?
It's a requirement, but now we're starting to see the investors, the financial side, actually say, okay, let's put models together for this.
Right.
Granted, it's not as expensive as a DAS system, but I'm starting to see these projects actually get funded. They might be $100,000 and it still might not work in their budget, but now they can, you know, take care of that financial piece for 3 years. Why not? Let somebody else.
And the encouraging part about all this too is that the federal government is going to push a lot of stimulus out there. So the CARES Act and education is a variety of things that will be out there that are technology focused. It's going to have to be part of it. So, you know, and as all those technologies become less siloed systems, I think Brett had spoke about AI, you know, on top of all that, it's going to all converge. And frankly, that phone, you know, my panic that happened yesterday, you know, we need wireless, we need it for our own sanity, but we need it for safety. So there's, and connectivity, frankly, in so many ways. So,
by the way, interest rates are really low. So if you're borrowing money.
Good point. Good
point.
Also
got that too.
Low, very low. So we've talked about a lot of challenges so far. We talked about skilled labor, mobilization, capital, you know, visibility, kind of, you know, an old mindset versus changing to a new. So we should probably, let's transition to the whole kind of how we're all adapting to this COVID. We've kind of all talked about it in pieces. So Shane, you know, how do you see the project planning and mobilization efforts changing, you know, now that we kind of set the stage at all these challenges? What is your organization, your team doing to kind of change? How is it different?
Well, you know, Brett said it. We're starting to launch the Site Tracker platform as one of the approaches, and the planning is always something that's important on these jobs. You have to take into account these unforeseen circumstances. But now, I could get a phone call about a job site that I have 40 technicians on, 24 have the need for quarantine for 14 days. One person tested positive. They were sitting around, they were in the break room for an hour within so many feet. They were primarily exposed, and now I have to sit that many folks. That's devastating for a job site. Did I lose you guys?
Yeah, we actually can still hear you. We just don't see your face. It's okay though. We can still hear you though, Shane.
Okay. All right. So anyway, from a planning perspective, that's different. You need to be able to plan on the fly. It's not just a normal planning. You have to be able to adjust, adapt as the spirit of this meeting. And that's challenging. So you need a lot of coordination. As far as the mobility piece, the mobilization piece, we're talking about a situation that is way different. It starts with just sharing a living space. We're a national company, so we have local teams around the country, and then you'll have situations where we move people around, and even within a proximity of a state, you might be working 3 hours out from the major metropolitan area. You might be sharing living spaces. That's completely different now. Carpooling, some areas not even allowed, right? Moving around within the site, you can't even share a cart. You can't share a man lift. And if you share a man lift, not only do you have to have a mask, you have to have a face shield with the mask. You know, if you're going to be within 6 feet for longer than X amount of minutes, that kind of thing has to happen. So you can't have group meetings. If you want a team meeting on safety or how the attack plan, and you want to get 50 people in a room, you cannot do that anymore. Now we have to create situations where we have groups of 3 or 4 max. Because if someone shares a tool or has been in close proximity with another who tested positive, you don't want to have to shut that whole site down because of that. If it affects 3 people that need to be quarantined, that's a lot better than if it affected 24 people. And these are real things. I get these phone calls. I get these phone calls like every other week. It's happening. I mean, we get it that we have to identify what a primary versus a secondary exposure is. People think, oh, someone was sick, they were on this job site, therefore everyone needs to go home. It's like, whoa, hey, hold on. That's not what's going on right now. That's actually not how it works. But these things, this planning piece of it is challenging. And I agree with Brett. I think this is a time that's really allowing us to flex. It's allowing us to really focus on how to be more creative, to be efficient.
Right.
I think a lot of companies are learning a lot during this time where we were complacent before because things were just as they were. Now this is forcing us to of doing something that is uncomfortable, and there's always good things that come from that.
Yeah, that adapt is true out there. Necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. So, hey, Brett, question for you. So, more thoughts. Some of your thoughts on how people best plan, deploy, maintain systems day one, but also post implementation. So, as we talk about kind of that complete.
Yeah, I think the reality is. I think. First thing is, like they say, is to admit you've got a problem, right? Until you do that, you're never going to be able to be in a position where you can actually get to solving that problem. So I think just saying, hey, I need to get ahead of this is the biggest step that most people can take. I know it's scary to make an investment into an unknown, particularly during an unknown time. But I think that if you don't start to make that commitment to yourself and your company, you're going to be way behind. I think post-implementation, like most things in life, we need to monitor what we're doing and overcome and optimize any challenges that you have. I think the beauty of a software is that if you have the right reporting mechanisms in place, you can actually see where those hurdles are and you can optimize faster. Rerouting resources becomes a simple task when you know who has what skill set, where they are, and then you can actually deploy them to the field much more efficiently and faster than ever before. So we think about margin optimization every day, all day, but now you can actually implement technologies to be able to help you do that. So I think, thinking about how you structure, even if you don't have a software, ignore Site Tracker from the world. How do you actually optimize what you're doing right now? Well, you need to interrogate every single step that goes into your team's days, itemize them, look for rooms for improvement, and look for opportunities to streamline that process, remove those barriers that were okay before, but are cumbersome now. So I think that that's the way that we need to start thinking about things, both pre and post deployment. And obviously from a maintenance perspective, you need to be ahead of the game. If you don't know what asset has been deployed where, when, how do you get ahead of that curve, right?
Yeah.
How do you know that this?
And ideally, Brett, to that point, the idea of just rolling trucks, so to speak, is
Exactly.
probably an old mentality, but the idea of maybe software is being preemptive and getting ahead of that, and maybe even doing it remotely, frankly.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Like if you can forecast when you need to roll a truck based on X asset life cycle, wow, you're ahead of the game, right? You've already allocated resources. You know that they can't go somewhere else. Your efficiency is exponentially increased. So even if you ignore time saving,
yeah.
You're still ahead of the curve. So I think that level setting what you're doing on a day-to-day basis is the most important thing that anyone can do. And that was before COVID.
Right.
Now that we're in the thick of it, this is something that we can't ignore and should be jumping on straight away.
So, I guess the reality is adapt. How can you rethink the model? And speaking of adapting and being more resilient and solutions oriented. So Amy, question for you, the supply chain, all supply chains, have been put to the test, right? How can you give us an example of adapt and being more resilient and how we or others have done that?
Yeah, so I think resilient is the word that you just used, right? That it resonates big time, right? And I think that's what Brett's talking about too, is how do we build resiliency in as we unpack every single task, right? And so it's all about our ability to meet those changing demands of the market. We're seeing, based on what Shane said, schedules, start dates and completion dates being unknown, schedules getting delayed, budgets being reallocated, forcing projects to either be put on hold or canceled when the supply chain is already in motion, right? So we're seeing customers, and some of the things that we're doing that are essentially a ripple effect, right, of everything that's been impacted from the top level down with these projects, and injecting more and more risk all the way down the traditional model. We're seeing the need for customers who are looking for new ways to manage the supply chain. I think Shane said early on, sourcing models. So, if the current specification or the equipment is not in stock, how do we select something that is more readily available, or does the schedule allow us to wait for that additional kind of unknown lead time, if you will, right? So, forward provisioning is something that a lot of customers that have come to us and asked us to do, where we may not have the sufficient stock to manage their project, but they're asking us to bring that material in to alleviate those lead times, which distribution has done since the beginning of time. It's very similar to what Brett said. There's no difference in terms of the services we're offering. They're just becoming more prioritized from our customers. It changes from a nice to have to a need to have. So the other thing we're seeing is how we deliver to the sites, right? So elevators, we're needing to be more flexible with our delivery schedules. We can't just drop a pallet off that may not fit into an elevator if Shane can only send one technician up an elevator to do a particular project, right? So we're looking at ways that we repackage what we are shipping to a customer in support of their project to help facilitate that new kind of normal that's happening inside the job site and inside the building on site. So at the end of the day, it's about being elastic, flexible, agile, and working together collaboratively between the planning, the unpacking of the tasks that Brett talked about, as well as, what are those site challenges that Shane's facing to kind of facilitate what needs to happen in order to facilitate on-time completion.
So thank you, Amy. We're running a little bit tighter on time now. We have room for probably a couple more questions to kind of discuss. And I think I want to segue from, we talked about if we have some property owners on the phone, on the call, along with customers, and you're thinking about, well, what does all this mean to me? And the question, we talk about margin stack and cash flow. And the reality is the more that we can decompress the stack, less touch points, it means a better, quicker, faster project deployment with less risk. And ideally, Lori, to your point, in an OpEx model. So in that version, I think in the old days when we thought of all those things, it had to be really big dollar amounts when everyone was talking about that. So, and I also think from our perspective, everyone, when these projects get positioned, it's always a question you have to roll out through finance, and, getting those projects approved kind of can be a little bit of a chore at times if it is capital and there isn't capital, right? So, what those financing options, they could improve the sales cycle or closing time or ability to kind of get that done. So Lori, just some insights into that.
Yeah, and as Amy just alluded to, there are so many different pain points throughout this process that could delay. The last thing you want to do is delay because you can't pay for it. And when you're about to have equipment, because from milestone payments, you're about to have equipment delivered, that's a big cost right there. But you need to have that, because then if everything doesn't get there, it falls short. And then now you've got scheduling issues and you've got more time that you have to invest into the project, which is costly. So, ultimately, when I look at this, the financiers out there are getting, they're getting savvier, because they realize that technology is something that they need to invest in to help make it happen. So that's why, like I said, in the traditional model sense, maybe 3-5 years ago, we were looking at these systems. If it was a large system, millions of dollars, yeah, we're probably going to get it built because we're going to go after the carriers and we're going to get it funded. But now we've got 500,000 square feet of mixed use. It's not that enticing for a carrier to come in and say, I'm going to, plug in, but the building owner needs to do something. So that's why it's palatable and very important to do your research to understand what models exist, because they do exist now. I can say that. I've done a lot of research with it. But what models exist and what's best for you. And it's just important. It's an important place to be. Another process or thought to this, from a reduction of project cost, if you're going to put networks into your building, whether it's Wi-Fi, whether it's public safety, whether it's DAS infrastructure, look at it as a whole. It is the fifth utility you're going to put it in. It is. So if you're going to put it in, let's look at it from a whole technology input. So you're running the fiber, you're running the cable, even though public safety has to be a standalone, that's typically the way it is. You don't want it on the same network. But what efficiencies can you put into the project to allow the cost to reduce? And I think it's important to look at that, because I've heard on so many occasions, our walls are up, our ceilings are up, I need to run fiber. Whoa. That's a big cost. I need to core and I need to drill in the stairwell. Wow, that's a big cost. Well, if you had done your pre-planning ahead of time, you could have done all of that right efficiently, right? Reduce that cost of that project and do it all in. And then you have a working system, and it's going to be working instead of having to do patch and repair work and paint those walls again. Yeah. So I guess my point is, start early. Learn the financing if you need financing, understand it all in, and build your strategy.
Peter, I just wanted to jump in. I've got to jump to another panel to get started there. But I had what I thought was an interesting question for the whole panel, and you guys can work this through. So I have a very dear friend who was pitching a very large project. And it seems to me that this is a chronic situation in the industry, that this was a huge company he was pitching who was going to be doing work for a carrier. So along the way, we've had humongous construction companies. We've had OEMs of all types and sizes doing work for the carriers. And invariably, these projects get started. And when someone like my friend who was pitching this asked questions about where's the equipment coming from, how is it being delivered, what are you doing for zoning, and what are you doing for this? And he asked a series of very, very intelligent questions. And as has happened to me in my whole career, the answer came back, we don't know. We're not sure. We haven't figured that out yet. We're not sure. We don't know. We're thinking about that. It's another thing to consider. But we're asked for pricing. We're asked for scheduling. We're asked for all kinds of different things. And you should be smiling, Brett, because this really reflects on you. It's these middlemen companies, and oftentimes the carriers themselves, just don't know. How in the industry are we going to solve that so that before we start a project, before we price a project, before we start kitting a project, how do we make sure that the middleman, whoever's doing the project, and the carrier themselves have all of these things figured?
Collaboration. What a blessed word it is, hey? Shared
Absolutely.
systems. Like I think everything starts with collaboration. I'm smiling because the way that software works is that it's easy for us to integrate. CTS can be integrated to any of our other customers to make that shared collaboration and communication happen seamlessly, right? If we're not communicating with each other, which is ironic because we're in the communications business, we're shot. So that's all I'm going to say on that topic. But I think it's an easy solution, one that we need to think about from a technology perspective to make our lives easier.
Gotcha. So I'm going to leave you and let you finish discussing this topic, Peter, because I think it's an important one. Is if they don't know, how should we know if we're going to do these projects? And I think it goes to Amy's point about the equipment side, Shane's on the integration side, Lori's on the pricing side and the financing side, and Brett's on cooperation. But I'd like to just want to encourage everybody who's listening into this panel to go in and visit our exhibitors, including our friends from Annixter, CTS, and please go into the chat rooms and enjoy all the different features, including all the giveaways that there are through our leaderboard. And I'm going to leave you and let you finish that topic. And thank you all for being on this panel.
Thanks, Rich. Appreciate it. By the way, that's kind of a capstone question to everything we've really discussed. At the end of the day, all this has to come together. How does it all come together from a labor, logistics, a capital perspective, and so we can complete projects faster, better, with less risk. So Shane or Lori, any thoughts on kind of that question that Rich had, because it's really kind of encapsulates everything we were talking about.
So collaboration, absolutely, Brett. I think that's powerful and important. And, when these projects start adding up, you have so many projects with timelines that you have to keep on top of. And it's really hard to do it because they're so close in scope and nature. So, when you're dealing with lots of PMs, you're dealing with the equipment side, you're dealing with the carrier side, you're looking for the approval for the design piece, you're back and forth. I need to, make sure that everything's on track. To have a strong person running that project, I think is really important to continue that conversation of sorts and collaboration to keep things on track. I love PMs. I think they're the most amazing things. People that work harder than I've seen, and they run those projects the way they need to. And it's important to get ahead and to think, because now that you're an expert in running a project, you'll know, I didn't get transport from the carrier. We didn't get to that group, in time. I didn't find out if we were gonna have the equipment on time. Oh, the elevator issue, that's a huge issue people don't think about. So all of these little issues add up, but somebody who's strong on the front line can make that happen.
It's funny, the term project manager, I used to refer to them as the profit manager. Shane, you could probably relate to that, because obviously you've got guys and gals out there that just know how to put things together and know how to contingency and pivot and kind of work it all out. Ultimately, it comes down to people, process, and a plan, 3 Ps. The other Ps, not marketing piece. So Shane, just any thoughts on kind of everything we talked about there?
Yeah, I mean, communication, they said communication collaboration is a transparency element. There's a certain cadence to communication that needs to be upheld. But in addition to that, getting all of the right people together, not just some of the people together. The reason these things don't happen on a converged level, as Lori was mentioning, why not stack different networks on the same common infrastructure? It's because there's different decision makers that aren't in the room. In addition to that, there's an education element. They simply don't know what's possible. So until they know what's possible, then it's not an option. So all of that has to come into play, and it takes a vast coordination and an open-minded willingness for everyone to participate in the conversation.
Well, I think we've had a lively discussion, talked about a lot of things, the challenges, perhaps some of the ways that all of us are adapting to this. We're going to get through all this, of course. Technology will be a key part of it. And I want to thank Brett, Lori, Amy, Shane. Thanks for your time this morning. Thanks for the lively conversation. And I'm sure anyone who's listening in, you could reach out and talk to these folks, participate in the show. So we really appreciate your time this morning. And thanks again to all of you.
Thanks,
Thank
Peter.
you.
Take care.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.